I'm still wondering what it costs and what would happen. There's a lot of nature in this house. So you can't, there's no possibility. But there's a possibility. So then I use that in terms of neurological possible growth, because when I ask what happened to the causes neurological that being against it. You have to, what you're imagining is this is that you still want to know well, if this happens, this is no other case. Somehow it's taken Okay, everybody, time to get started again. Okay, please welcome our second speaker, John Roman, who will be telling us about synesthetic color.
Thank you. And thanks for having me here today. So I've been thinking about synesthetic color for a while in different kinds of ways, and only recently philosophically. The question, what is synesthetic color, I think easy and maybe uninteresting answer to that question, which is that synesthetic color is the color involved in cases of color synesthesia, a neurological condition in which color experiences are produced by something other than visible light. But my interest in writing this paper has more to do with what the main theories in color ontology would say about synesthetic color. How would they treat synesthetic color? Would they recognize synesthetic color as real? If not, why not? And if so, how would they ascribe synesthetic color as properties to objects? And would they be able to distinguish synesthetic color from normal colors? How would they do that? So these are the kinds of questions I'm interested in. And I'll talk about three lines of thinking broadly. Realism, external realism in particular. The view that color is a property of objects and therefore real. Anti-realism, that color isn't a property of objects and therefore not real. And then adverbialism, a certain formulation that's been given by Mishrita Sharmuda recently, that color is a property of interactions. So in regard to those questions I was talking about earlier, which theory can affirm the reality of synesthetic color and which can distinguish synesthetic color from normal color, and avoid the excess of ascribing these color properties to all of the kinds of things that induce synesthetic color, because synesthetic color by definition is color experience induced by something other than the things that normally induce color experience. So I find that the adverbialism, the view that color is a property of interactions, can do all three of these things if we want all three of these things. So whether this is a new direction or a dead end, I suppose we'll find out shortly. So first, let me just talk about what synesthesia is. So synesthesia is a kind of a broad and general definition, is a neurological condition in which the stimulation of one sensory modality or cognitive pathway leads to involuntary experiences in a second modality or cognitive pathway. And the original stimulus is known as the inducer, and the secondary experience is known as the concurrent. So cases of color synesthesia are cases of synesthesia in which the concurrent is color. So for example, in a case of sound color synesthesia, the stimulus would be sound, and then that would be accompanied by a certain experience of color. So for example, hearing the sound of a church organ and an experience of greenness. And there are variations in the types of inducers for synesthetic color. There's grapheme color synesthesia. There's, I think, smell color synesthesia, taste color synesthesia. And the inducer concurrent associations vary. So for some, the sound of a church organ might be associated with an experience of greenness, and for others it might be associated with an experience of redness, for example. And broadly speaking, there are two kinds of synesthetic color experience. The projective kind, in which people report color being projected into their visual field. This is something that's been tested with after-image and pop-out tests. And then associative synesthesia, which Fiona McPherson describes as colors being in the mind's eye or the head. And to be a genuine case of this kind of associative synesthesia, these colors need to be involuntary, vivid, and reliably associated. So I guess there's some difficulty in understanding how we should classify synesthetic color. Are they hallucinatory, illusory, or like normal colors? In each case seems to be a bit of an awkward fit. Unlike hallucinatory colors, they do involve an interaction with external stimuli. Unlike normal colors, the stimuli that's part of this interaction is not the kind of thing that's involved in normal color. And then unlike illusory colors, they don't inhibit or obscure our interactions with the external world. They seem to do the opposite. So I think that essentially the problem of synesthesia consists in this tension between its abnormality but also its usefulness. These colors are idiosyncratic and unrelated to the things normal colors relate to, and yet they prove to be useful in basic perceptual and complex cognitive tasks. So I think perhaps the most promising strategy for deflating the problem of synesthetic color is to treat synesthetic colors as illusory. Richard Gray and Torrent Alter take this route. Adam Waite and Greg Rosenberg disagree. So I have trouble buying some of the arguments for why synesthetic color is illusory, or at least I need more convincing. If synesthetic color is illusory, I think one of these two claims have to be true. That synesthetic color is maladaptive, that is, it interferes with the perceiver's environmental interactions in some way, or that only normal colors can represent external stimuli. That these synesthetic colors, by definition, are essentially non-veridical. In regard to the first claim, it seems the consensus among synesthesia researchers is that synesthesia is more likely to enhance rather than inhibit person performance in basic perceptual and cognitive and more complex cognitive tasks. Synesthesists group have superior memory, greater than average intelligence, and excel at certain complex tasks like metaphor making and artistic creation. And then in regard to the second claim, beyond preserving a prior commitment to externalist representationalism, I don't find a compelling reason why only non-synesthetic experience can relate to representational content. So representationalism is, as Horn Alter defines it, the view that phenomenal properties are representational properties. And so color synesthesia poses a threat to the externalist representationalist because it allows for the possibility that two mental states, one synesthetic and one not, can be alike in representational content, but different in phenomenal character. And so therefore the externalist claims that synesthetic colors are misrepresentations to ensure that the representational content cannot yield different phenomenal properties. So in their view, both Alter and Gray, synesthetic colors represent the same things that normal colors represent, but since by definition synesthetic colors are not caused by the same things as normal colors, synesthetic colors can only misrepresent. But I think this treatment overstates the relationship between representational content and phenomenal character. For the sound color synesthete, both oral and chromat and color experience, both the oral and color character of their experience seem to relate to the representation of sound. And in fact, for some synesthetes, the concurrent experience is not something extra, but an inseparable part of experiencing the inducer, in this case sound. So one sound shape synesthete describes his hearing as follows. He says the sounds are not distinct from hearing, the shapes are not distinct from hearing sounds, they are part of what hearing is. That's just what sound is. It couldn't possibly be anything else. And so of course the oral experience of sound is normal, while the chromatic experience of sound is abnormal. But I don't think it follows that only the former can represent sound. And considering in genuine cases of sound color synesthesia, synesthetic color is as involuntary and reliable as oral experience is for non-synesthetes. The choice to reduce synesthetic color to the same status as illusion seems weakly supported. So if we are to privilege normal phenomenal properties over the synesthetic phenomenal properties, I think our reasons need to be more than an appeal to the non-synesthete majority. And so since I don't find those reasons, I'm opting to to put both synesthetic color and normal color on the same ontological footing. So in color ontology, I mean, there are two basic lines of thinking: realism and anti-realism. And in realism, the view is that colors are properties of objects, and I'm only considering externalist realism here, so physicalism, dispositionalism, primitivism. And the other view, anti-realism, that colors are not properties of objects, and therefore colors aren't real. And so in the case of the realist, some philosophers choose to try to determine which properties these are of objects that they can identify with color, and that this seems to be a difficult task. Some choose reflectance, that's the amount of light an object reflects. Others choose productance, the kind of light that the light that comes from an object. Byrne and Hilbert take that strategy. But according to these views, the reality of color depends on whether color can be located in the external world. If color is a property of objects, it's real. If not, it's not real. And this is what Frank Jackson calls the location problem of color. He says, colors must, if they are instantiated anywhere, be findable somehow. And so this location approach to color ontology is present in both realism and anti-realism. It's present in Barry Mound's anti-realist claim that colors are virtual and that although I locate them in space, they're not actually there. And also in Brian McLaughlin's realism, when he claims that it's the job of vision science to identify the physical property in question and thereby to locate the property of redness in nature. And so this approach may seem unproblematic for normal color, but when applied to synesthetic color, some difficulties arise. So if synesthetic color is real, it must be a property of objects. However, given the diversity of stimuli that induce synesthetic experience and the idiosyncratic nature of these synesthetic color associations, the ascription of these color properties to objects would result in an extreme ontological excess. And while the realist might argue that normal color can be restricted to some objective property, say reflectance, there's no such restriction available in the case of synesthetic color, since by definition, synesthetic color is color experience induced by something other than what induces normal color. So in effect, there could be as many such properties in the world as there are inducer and concurrent associations. On the other hand, if synesthetic color is not real, we have two options, one anti-realist and one realist. The anti-realist option is to claim that synesthetic color, like all colors, is not real. And on the one hand, this gives synesthetic color the same ontological status as normal color. On the other hand, it's difficult to say how we would distinguish synesthetic color from normal color. On the other hand, the realist option is to claim that synesthetic colors are not real because they're not properties of objects. And on the one hand, this does distinguish synesthetic color from normal color. But on the other hand, it treats synesthetic color as ontologically different, a stance which I'm skeptical about. In a longer version of this paper, I also address Cohen's role functionalism and Metton's sensory classificationism. We can talk about that in the Q&A if you'd like. So I think if we take this location approach to color, accommodating synesthetic color seems difficult, if not impossible. Not all theories take this route. Ms. Vita Shiramuda proposes an adverbial theory which avoids this problem of location. So instead of restricting color to objective properties, Shiramuda defines colors as property of interactions between perceivers and stimuli. So against the location approach, she argues that there's no color in the object on the one hand and color in the mind on the other. There's just one color, the property of a perceptual process. And by process here, she means a perceiving event. And by property, she has something in mind like an adverb. So just to be clear, an event is some unit of space-time, something that has a spatial location and a certain temporal duration, and an adverb is something that describes an event. So a clapping of hands is an event. And so because Shiramuda conceives of colors as properties of events, her standards for reality differ from those who consider colors to be properties of objects. In her view, the reality of color doesn't depend on whether they are properties of objects, but whether they're useful to the perceiver. So she adopts a form of pragmatism with regard to perception, in which correspondence is replaced by usefulness. So when asked, what does it take for a perceptual state to be right, in her pragmatism, she responds that it must work, it has to give a useful guide to the surrounding environment. And when asked, what are perceptual states for, her response is to help you live by guiding your activity in the world. In contrast to the correspondence answer, which would be to the first question, what does it take for a perceptual state to be right, that the external world must correspond to the perceptual state that it represents, and what are perceptual states for, to detect what is in the external world. So in Shiramuda's view, colors are adverbs of perceiving events, and color's reality depends on its usefulness, not on its place in the external world. And so this is the definition she gives of color. Colors are properties of perceptual interactions involving the perceiver, endowed with a spectrally discriminating visual system and a stimulus with spectral contrast of the sort that can be exploited by this visual system. So by perceiver, she means any sighted animal with the right kind of visual system, and by right kind of visual system, she means that the visual machinery of all creatures conventionally classified as having color vision proper. So she doesn't want to include things like for example, a worm that responds to light stimuli doesn't qualify as having color on her view. The visual system has to involve component processing or some degree of color constancy. And by stimulus, she means an excitation that bears spectral contrast, which is that it reflects or generates patterns of light that are within the discriminable range of the perceiver's visual system. And so I think there are some useful parts to take of Shiramuda's approach for dealing with synesthetic color, if we want to give synesthetic color a fuller treatment than treating it as illusion. Although we couldn't recognize synesthetic color as color on the definition as it's proposed. So I offer the following trio of definitions. And so the definition that she gives of color, I think is the right one to give for normal color. And the definition you could offer for synesthetic color goes something like this: that synesthetic colors are properties of perceptual interactions involving a perceiver with a synesthetic sensory system and a stimulus that does not involve spectral contrast, but that the system can exploit to produce experience that is qualitatively similar to normal color. And then lastly, colors in general are properties of interactions involving a perceiver with a color perceiving sensory system and a stimulus that induces color experience. So I don't know how to remove color from the second part, from the right hand side of that definition. I think colors are just colors, and I don't know if there's much more we can say about that, but we can I guess investigate the things that are often part of interactions that give rise to color. So in its rejection of the location approach and its inclusion of color experiences not induced by the spectral contrast stimuli, I find adverbialism better equipped to deal with synesthetic color. So by adopting that trio of definitions, I think we can do these three things that I set out to do at the beginning of the talk. And the first is that we can affirm the reality of synesthetic color by first putting synesthetic color and normal color on the same ontological footing as properties of interactions, and also by acknowledging the usefulness of synesthetic color instead of treating color as being a property of objects. And then secondly, we can distinguish synesthetic color from normal color with reference to the kind of stimulus involved in these kinds of interactions. And third, we can avoid the excess of the ontological excess of describing these properties to everything that induces synesthetic color by limiting these descriptions just to the interactions when they occur between the stimuli in question and the perceivers. So of course, many problems remain for adverbialism, and it's not my intent to defend all of those problems. Some of them I have no answer to. I don't have an answer to Frank Jackson's make property problem. But I do want to argue that much of what we consider to be distinct weaknesses of adverbialism may be distinctly advantageous for dealing with synesthetic color. So in particular, I'll look at criticisms regarding procedure dependence, predication, and phenomenology. Jonathan Cohen raises these objections, among others, in his review of Shiramuda's book, and so I'll respond to each of them in turn. First, the problem of perceiver dependence. Since colors are properties of interaction between perceivers and stimuli, they're necessarily perceiver dependent. And colors are present only where the stimuli of the right kind and perceivers of the right kind are interacting. So therefore, in the absence of perceivers, there aren't colors. So Cohen raises the objection that this is counterintuitive and idealistic to suppose that colors go in and out of existence with events when perceivers die or close their eyes or shift attention. But I think this rapid creation and termination of colors is inoffensive. Shermood is not arguing that physical properties like reflectance go in and out of existence. She's just denying that colors exist apart from these interactions. So, and she denies that we should identify color with any one component of such interactions. So, in her view, reflectance exists, perceivers exist, illuminance exists. When they interact, normal color exists as well. And when they don't, the color ceases to exist. And so a theory that claims colors are perceiver independent implicitly deny the reality of synesthetic colors. So synesthetic colors are ephemeral and highly idiosyncratic. They do go in and out of existence as the synesthete shifts attention, and the inducer color associations vary widely across individual cases of synesthesia. So, for example, Blake and his colleagues in 2005 give this example of these two sets of graphemes, and they're given to these grapheme color synesthetes. So the grapheme in either case in both sets is the same. In the first set, presented beside A and C, it induces an experience of the B color. We can call that red or something. And then in the second set, it induces an experience of the 13 color. We can call it something like orange, I suppose. And they also found that when the synesthete shifted attention between these two sets, they had a different experience. In the one case, they could switch between the 13 color orange and the B color red. So if synesthetic colors are perceiver-dependent properties, this example really poses no threat. The two synesthetic colors associated with this grapheme go in and out of existence depending on how the perceiver tends to them. And so there's no one synesthetic color property ascribed to this grapheme. However, we do encounter some difficulty explaining this example if synesthetic color properties are perceiver independent. And so, in order to maintain the reality of synesthetic color, we have to either ascribe contradictory properties to the same thing. So this would bear red and orange at the same time, or we could choose one to the exclusion of the other, the red color or the orange color. And I don't think each case makes much sense. The first one would be contradictory, and the second one seems arbitrary. And Cohen also criticizes Shermood's account for conflicting with the usual view that color qualifies individuals rather than events, a tradition which is supported by grammatical structure of color predications in almost every natural language. To this, well, there are two responses to this. One which involves a bit of shoulder shrugging, and another defensive view which synesthetic color could help us could help us defend. So I mean, Shermood is clear in saying that she's not giving account for how we talk, nor is she suggesting how we should talk. So the suggestion that saying a sentence instead of "I see red," changing it to "I see redly" is not a suggestion for prescriptive in the sense of how we should talk when we proceed. And she's not saying that this is how we do talk already. In fact, it'd be remarkable if our ordinary way of predicating could predict some of the latest developments in color science. And I'm not sure whether this reconciliation between language and the nature of color are entirely possible. But where adverbialism appears inadequate in accounting for natural language predication seems inadequate for accounting for synesthetic color experience. So in ordinary language, only certain combinations of sensing verbs and sensory properties make sense. For example, I hear red is awkward and it's difficult to understand. And similarly, I see red in my mind's eye when I hear a certain kind of sound is maybe more grammatical, but hardly less cryptic, and I think more misleading than it is informative of synesthetic experience. And as testimony from one sound color synesthete describing his experience, he says it's definitely colors, but I'm not sure that seeing is the most accurate description. I am seeing, but not with my eyes, if that makes sense. Verbalism, on the other hand, can accommodate synesthetic statements with less strain. For example, I hear readily avoids the problem of locating synesthetic color, whether out there or in the mind's eye, and instead interprets it as an interaction between the perceiver and stimuli. And I think this is at least, that this is more reflective, or at least less misleading of what synesthetic experience is like. Synesthetic colors, I don't think, are things that are seen, but ways of doing blank, whether it's hearing or smelling or tasting. And in cases of cognitive synesthesia, let's say involving graphing or a certain concept, this might be a certain way of thinking, or a vivid case of the phenomenology of thought. Now, provided we don't immediately reject adverbial statements due to their grammatical strangeness, I think there is an appeal to this construction. For most synesthetes, red only describes, for most non-synesthetes, red describes seeing events. For some sound color synesthete, red also describes hearing events. But in either case, red is a property of an interaction involving a perceiver and stimulus, and not a property that I don't think is a property necessarily linked to any one sensory input. And so finally, Cohen makes an objection to phenomenology, the event view that goes against our ordinary phenomenology. Colors look to be properties of individuals rather than events. And it's unclear what kind of examples could convince him otherwise. And it does seem to be quite literally two ways of looking at the same thing. I perceive colors within the context of perceptual events, and I don't know what the color of an individual divorced from an event would look like. Surface colors may appear as properties of individuals in a certain sense, but not timelessly so. And there are some examples of this. For example, the play of colors on the back of a CD seems to be a case in which, if not relational, if not at least some evidence that colors relational, could also be that it's an event. Robert Pasnaw, for example, in arguing for an event view of color, remarks that with some practice, he has come to see colors as events as a kind of constant flame, while roughly on the surface of objects. And in doing so, he says, the experience of seeing seems to take on a new and richer character, as if I'm only now understanding what I'm seeing. Not that I'm advocating for that kind of way of seeing color, though it does seem possible, although very implausible. And I also think that for those who have an intuitive resistance to accept the event view of color, synesthetic color phenomenology offers a counterweight here. While surface color may appear stable and constant, synesthetic colors induced by sound stimuli tend to involve motion and dynamic form. For one synesthete, music is perceived as colors moving like dots, like people in a crowd at a football game when the camera zooms in on them. For another, sounds are mostly likened to oscilloscope configurations, lines moving in color, often metallic with height, width, and most importantly, depth. And for yet another, the note of a vibraphone is perceived as a little gold ball falling. And I see no way of expressing the phenomenology of synesthetic color without reference to events, and to simply say that each note of the vibraphone is gold seems to flatten the dynamic character of synesthetic color to the stable color of chairs and tables. So in conclusion, whether we want to put synesthetic colors on the same ontological footing as normal colors remains an open question. I've given this only a light treatment and it deserves a more extended discussion. However, what I think I have shown is that if synesthetic colors are real, anti-realism fails to tell us how they're distinct from normal colors, and realism fails to recognize them as anything more than illusion. So the kind of adverbial theory I propose at least allows us to do some of these things. Allows us to recognize the reality as well as distinguishing them from normal colors. So in the end, this paper is as much an acknowledgement of some of the limits in color ontology as it is a cautionary tale of the consequences of accepting synesthetic colors as real. So this leaves us with two paths forward, I think. One is to offer more compelling arguments for why synesthetic colors are illusory, and in this case, why we shouldn't have to bother with them, or revise our theories to accommodate synesthetic color. But in either case, it seems there's work to be done, so thank you.
Hey, thanks, John. Great, first on.
Thanks, John. I wanted to probe whether the sorts of considerations you've been exploring here generalize, or if there's something special about color, synesthetic color. So to make the point, here's a rather frivolous example. So suppose there's such a thing as badger synesthesia.
Sorry?
As badger synesthesia.
Badger.
So that whenever I hear a C sharp, I have an experience as of a badger. This seems like it could be a thing. So in that case, I take it we really wouldn't be inclined to think synesthetic badgers are metaphysically on a par with non-synesthetic badgers. So the question then is what's so special about the case of color?
Right. So let me just try and understand this, the badger synesthesia.
Yeah.
Are you saying that you have the experience like of a badger?
As of a badger, yeah.
As of a badger?
Yeah.
Okay.
And may I add, you can be as sort of realistic as you like, right? One might think that there's really a badger there or something like that. You could build that in.
Okay. Right. Now I think, and the reason why there's an appeal to usefulness here is because I do want to say synesthetic colors, unlike illusions or hallucinations, aren't just these unuseful things that obstruct our environmental interactions. Something like the perception of the badger in the case of seeing C sharp, it'd be hard to see how that would enhance your interactions with the environment. So that's the reason for my appeal to usefulness. I don't want to say that all of these kinds of experiences are real, but I want to say the ones that reliably correlate with something in the external world, and we can use as a basis for our interactions and our that can tell us about some features of the external world. I think those things are real. I'm not sure that the badger example qualifies for that kind of real.
Badger codes are always in C sharp.
Thank you.
Casey.
Yeah, so imagine a funny form of synesthesia. It's a temperature color synesthesia. So every time a person feels something cold, they have synesthetic color experiences as of blueness.
Mm-hmm.
So now this person's in an environment where all the cold things are blue. So every time, say the lights are out.
Okay.
So every time they feel something cold, they have a blue experience. And then the lights are flipped on and lo and behold, it's blue, and they experience it to be blue. So that seems like a situation where we'd say the synesthetic color experience is veridical. Contrast that case with one in which the same person is in an environment where the correlation between the temperatures and colors of things doesn't hold. So the cold things might be red, they might be green, and so the lights are out. The person feels the blue thing, or feels the cold thing, has the bluish experience. Then the lights get flipped on. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. Seems like at least some of those episodes are illusory. So it seems like this distinction isn't one that the synesthetic color adverbialist is able to capture adequately.
Right. So, get this right in the example, you have temperature color synesthesia, and so I'm curious about the experience involved with this, the hypothetical case of temperature color synesthesia. Is it that whatever causes the experience of coldness, they experience as blueness, they think that that object has that property of blueness?
Yeah, it's a very special form of synesthesia. It's philosophical synesthesia. It's sort of like philosophical hallucination. So it's indistinguishable for the subject from the experience of seeing one of these things.
Right.
The person is a vivid projector, vivid synesthetic binding projector.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, the thing, so the cases that I'm most interested in this are cross-modal cases and cases of especially associative synesthesia, so not the kind that are projected. And it's difficult to see how, so would they also get the shape right of these, in the hypothetical example, would they get the shape right of these objects? Or, because I'm wondering what exactly the experience of blueness would be like in
They
this
just
case.
think that's a blue thing. They experience blueness and they attribute it to the thing.
Right, okay.
I mean, I think
Yeah.
you don't need the binding and all of that stuff. I mean, you just have the.
Right, because I think one of the difficulties with synesthesia, especially with synesthetic colors, you think it's a property proper to sight. So it's when you say so blueness, for example, would only be a way of seeing for the adverbialist, where I'm not sure if that's right. I think it's more a way of hearing, and that synesthetic color has to do with whatever the inducer is. So in this case, it would be the character of the temperature. I'm not sure if the phenomenology of synesthetic color is such that it's really like the visual color in that kind of vivid way. But if it is in this case, if it's projecting into the environment, and the synesthetic and the synesthete in this case is no way of distinguishing the projective kind of synesthesia, these blue objects, and the actual real objects. Yeah, that would strike me as illusory. And again, on these grounds of usefulness, which is why I appeal to it, because if you had such a cases where in the temperature you touch the object and then you get this projection of a blue thing there, that would only seem accidentally right on that account, not useful, because it wouldn't be describing it would be ascribing the wrong kind of thing to that case. I don't know if that answers it.
Yeah, Peter.
This isn't well thought out, it also might be especially stupid, but so at the end of the talk, I mean, it was so Cohen's three objections, and it seemed like the main aspect of your response was, well, I mean, you also want to sort of say they're not very good objections or shrug Cohen's, but the main response that you had was that maybe there are objections to adverbialism with regard to normal colors or color in general, but actually adverbialism is really good in these points,
right?
With respect to synesthetic color. So, talk me through why we wouldn't think that adverbialism is true about synesthetic colors and not true about normal colors.
Right.
Is that a viable?
Yeah. I think well, I haven't given much thought to a kind of split theory where we can treat normal colors in a certain way and synesthetic colors in a different way. My inclinations say that I want to have some uniformity in how we treat the sensory properties. So why wouldn't we?
Because
Right.
precisely the issues that Cohen raising, you get split kind of things. It deals adverbialism deals one in one case and not the other. So there's prima facie motivation for giving. I mean, I don't know enough about this.
Right. Yeah, it seems at least possible. I think something like Cohen's account does a better job of normal color than the Adverbialist does. Again, the advantages really come in when dealing with synesthetic color. So it's possible, but I don't want to. I can't commit to that yet because I haven't given much thought. Thanks.
Okay, Rob. So if I'm following, one of your main motivations for going in for shared good as view is that you to give this uniform account. You can treat synesthetic color as ontologically another instance of the same ontological category, right? As regular color. But I want to push back against that.
Yeah.
I mean, there are color experiences that are not, well, there are colors that we wouldn't ordinarily say are features of perceptual interaction, such as seeing stars or after images. So there is this thing that's, you know, perceptual, or sorry, experience as a color experience that we wouldn't associate with a perceptual interaction. It doesn't seem from the first perspective to be such. So why not treat synesthetic color that way? Here's a reason to think we should.
Okay.
Ordinarily, regular color is something we actually attribute to surfaces, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds we don't. Sounds we're less likely to sort of objectivize, right? So we don't think that the organ is G sharp, right? We think that it emits a G sharp sound, right? So of course this is all very confusing. That's why we've been, do philosophy. But if a synesthete hears color, or that is sort of wrapped up with the sound quality, that makes it sound like it's really not functioning in the perceptual experience the way that it normally does in visual experience, which is
That's right.
that it's attributed to surfaces. So that makes me think, it's a concomitant visual sensation, and we should treat it as of a piece with these other non-perceptual instances of perceptual or of color experience. So why not go that route rather than say it's just like color and perceptual experience?
So why not go for treat it like after images or those kind of colors? Yeah, I mean, so I think, and again, my interest is in this associative synesthesia, not the projective kind, where it's projected out to the visual field, and I think maybe you could make a case for that with regard to similarities between after images and this kind of projective synesthesia. With regard to the after image case, and again, the tension that I find in synesthetic color is that it's abnormal and it seems kind of like these after image cases or something like that. But at the same time, there is a certain usefulness to it. It's reliable, and whenever you interact with certain things, this is part of that experience, which seems not unlike our ordinary sensory properties. In the case, and so the appeal to usefulness allows me to say something like the after image obscures part of the environment and will lead you to think falsely that there's something there. And the synesthetic, especially the associative kind of experience with synesthetic color, I don't think it's properly described as seeing. I don't think that color is something that's proper to sight. The people with grapheme color synesthesia of the associative kind have no problem saying what color the actual grapheme is, even though it's experienced as greenness or redness or whatever like that. So it seems unlike the after image in that case, and useful unlike the after image. So I think that's one way, or at least a tension which I'm resistant to classing them in the same way.
Okay, so they're both, so synesthetic color is useful as is regular visual perceived color. But they're different because visually perceived color is seen as a feature of surfaces, whereas synesthetic color isn't.
Right.
So that might be a reason that would cut against treating them as ontologically equivalent.
Right, yeah. But why not ontologically equivalent? I can see why you should treat them as distinct, but.
Well, I'm saying we got this other possibility, and that's that synesthetic color is not a feature of an interaction between me and a thing. It's a quality of my experience, and that's how we should treat it, just like we do in the after case. So that's another option. So I'm just trying to see the motivation for reaching for this adverbialism rather than just a kind of sensationalism. I don't know the lingo, but.
Right, but yeah, as opposed to it. So why not treat the synesthetic color as kind of this byproduct, something not involved in the interaction? Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to make that case from a non-synesthetic perspective because it seems like an added thing that's kind of tacked on to the ordinary experience. But as far as my understanding of the synesthetic experience, it seems inseparable and bound up with, let's say, the oral experience. So it's not clear how the synesthete exactly separates those two things. And I know in those cases, taking the color experience away from the hearing experience is something that those individuals aren't able to do. So why prefer the oral component of that experience to the color component of that experience, apart from color is not normally associated with hearing? So I have difficulty finding a rationale for that.
And I think we need more people than we're gonna
Sure.
get to, so let's, Sean.
Yep.
Adam.
Yeah, I have a problem for your mutual view
Yeah.
in the normal case, which differs from the problems you addressed. You can comment. The problem is basically a finding problem.
Right.
So suppose you look at a tomato on pure mutant's view, which I gather is also your view. The redness is a property of the interaction,
Right.
which is the long causal process going from the tomato to the brain. That process or interaction is not round. In fact, it has no shape at all.
Mhm.
So this view is hard pressed to explain the evident phenomenological fact that it seems to you that there is something that is red and round out there.
Right.
The fact that redness and roundness seem bound together.
Right.
Here's an analogy which sort of illustrates the problem. Suppose I have a philosophical interaction with kindly Chris Hill, which is difficult. So the interaction has the property of being difficult. That doesn't make it seem to me that there's something out there which is difficult and Chris Hill shaped. Chris Hill is a kindly person. And having this interaction, it just doesn't seem to me that the difficultness and the Chris Hill shapedness are bound together. So I've actually talked with her about this, and she said that APA, I was predicting it. She said it presupposes representationalism as phenomenological data, but it just doesn't. It's just a pre-theoretic, theory-neutral data. That it seems to us that there are things out there that have colors and shapes. Yeah.
Yeah, to the binding problem in the normal case of color, I don't have a response there. I don't know how exactly you handle that. Maybe that's reason to think of wanting to have a split treatment of these kinds of things like you proposed earlier. Maybe, I'm not sure. I think in the case of, let's say, something like color, hearing color synesthesia, it's not as though that color experience can really be located anywhere. So that's an advantage for color being unbound in the case of the color hearing, but it's a disadvantage for the case of normal color and surface color. So yeah, I acknowledge that. The normal, I can't answer that criticism on the normal account.
I'm slightly wondering what you mean by real here. I mean, there's a form of inference you make a number of times. It goes from these experiences are useful to these experiences are real. Now, I guess it's completely uncontentious that the experiences are genuinely occurring in person.
Right.
So it's not that sense of real.
Yeah.
One sense of real that might have been in the air is veridical, representing things as they are. And that's definitely not what you want. So what is it that you are giving as the meaning to real when you think there's a substantial claim to be made here?
Right. And so I suppose it's an unsatisfying and pragmatic one that instead of treating reality as a correspondence, so having a certain perceptual state of a color and there being something out there that corresponds to that perceptual state, it's one just of usefulness.
Right, but that sounds.
I know it's a cop-out, but
I don't know. I mean, here's a question: why not go the whole hog and say I have nothing to do with realism. I want nothing to do with talk of the real and the unreal. I simply want to say these things are useful.
I suppose, yeah. Then I don't know
What's the
where-
extra supposed to?
No.
You do want an extra. So I wonder what the extra.
No, yeah, I don't know what the, I don't know where the real would be in that view then. Yeah, I suppose all I really want to say is useful. So no, I don't want anything extra. Maybe I just don't want reality in correspondence terms.
Right. So it's more that you're downgrading, so to speak, objective colours on things, what other people want to see. But then, you know, you did say something which suggested that you took that a bit more seriously. You came at the end to say, and this is in the discussion, so maybe, you know, it shouldn't be taken as whatever, you know, canonical statement. But you said synesthetes have no difficulty telling the real colours of things. They know that their synesthetic experience is very different from other kinds of experience. If you ask them, is this a red thing, they'll have no difficulty answering that question.
Yeah.
If you say that,
No.
you're probably taking quite seriously a notion of red that actually makes paradigmatic something which doesn't include synesthetic experience.
Right. So when I say real color, I should have said, I guess, normal color or surface color in that case. That's right. I mean, the normal color is the paradigmatic, the visual thing, the color of the chair. That's what we usually think color is, and of course, I think that's right. But again, I think it's just difficult to understand why we should downgrade the synesthetic experience if it always comes with a certain kind of interaction, seems inseparable from certain kinds of interactions. That's the difficulty I have.
Okay, we started a few minutes late, so let's say we have 5 minutes, we've got 3 questions.
I have an objection to the adverbial account, a possible alternative. The objection to the adverbial account is I didn't see the word experience coming, and I could apply it to a machine, the camera. And the alternative is that synesthesia seems to be is essentially about experience, and we're familiar with quality inversions. Is it not just a quality inversion that happens across modalities?
So could you just the earlier part about the machines? Could you just spell that out?
If you put up the cheery whatever definition, I didn't see experience coming to it, and I said, could I, if I have a PC with a camera and an arm and all this interaction, you know, the camera sees something out there, computer program does something, the arm does something. Doesn't the adverbial account just describe that with nothing more, no experience in it?
Right. Well, I mean, in the definitions of color, I do talk about color experience.
I didn't see it in the adverbial thing. Maybe I just missed it.
Maybe we can put it up.
Yeah, sure. But right.
Yeah, well, see the spectrum discriminating visual system, that's a camera, right?
Right.
Stimulus, that's a tomato out there. And where's the experience?
Right. So in the definition of normal colors.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I think you're right to include color experience there on the two accounts that the two definitions that I add of future experience, and I didn't include experience on that first one. Because Shiramuda doesn't include experience in that first one. I think the experience should be included. Colors just seem to be, firstly, like experiential, whatever they are, their experience, and then whatever they pick out of the interactions that involve, that's a secondary. So yeah, you're right, and I should revise that.
And that,
I think we should push on. Howard.
I was disconnected with the adverbialism problem thing. I don't understand in what sense
synesthetic or colour or even sound, is a way in which a causal process going from your shirt to my brain does that. And it's not that doesn't seem to be a manner of the electricity or whatever it is, or the sound waves doing. But connected with that, presumably a synesthetic person would get the same experience if the brain was directly stimulated. In other words, if they were given a sound hallucination, they get a colour hallucination with it. It's somebody who takes her view about it being an adverbial process, feature of the whole process, committed to a form of disjunctivism about these, about synesthetic experiences. If they were parts of hallucinations, they're not really the same kind of thing as the synesthetic experience you have when you're actually seeing or hearing real sound.
Right, yeah, she doesn't endorse a disjunctive account for dealing with hallucination. That's right.
Okay, and our last question from David.
Yes, I just have a question about the phenomenon. So,
Yeah.
So let's take the graphing example. Would a projective synesthete see the letter B as say green? Would it appear green?
Right, so for the projective synesthete, it is in the visual field, but as far as I know, they can still tell what color the surface color of the.
So where is it located in the visual field?
It's located on the graphene. I don't know how it maintains both colors at once, but it seems to do that.
And then in the other case, the non-projective case, what's the experience like? Is it a flash of color? Is it a blobby thing? What's the experience like?
Right. Well, the what's it like question, I guess I can only speak for myself here.
Are you a synesthete?
I am, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So with let's say the graphene case, I mean it's a really indistinct shape. It's not, and I have the associative kind, so it's not right on the object or anything like that. But it's an experience of, and this is why I think that, I mean, it seems like in the cognitive case, it's something like graphene recognizing that shape as a certain thing. Seems to be involved the phenomenology of thinking that thing, recognizing that shape as a B or as a 13. But in the associative case, no, it's not right on or, about the thing. And it's still, when people talk about seeing these colors, I think that misrepresents the phenomenology of synesthesia. Because it's not like it's out in the associative kind, it's not like it's out there, and it's not like it's in the mind's eye and start talking about space and in visual terms of synesthetic color seems to misrepresent it in some way.
So, but there's some blobby blue thing in your experience.
I think that's the best analogy.
And it's located, it doesn't appear to be located out there, so it's more like an upper image.
No, I mean, it's not in the visual field. So it's not.
It's not in the visual field, meaning it's not seen as out there, but you see it. It's visually experienced. Or do you just think blue?
Yeah, I whenever I start explaining this stuff, I feel like I reach a dead end. No, it's not the visual field, and I think it's different. Like it's different than thinking of blueness because it's involuntary and reliable, and it just comes with the recognition of that grapheme as a.
That thinking blue could be involuntary and reliable as well.
Right.
But if you have an experience of blueness, I'm just wondering, when you say it doesn't appear in the visual field, do you mean you don't have a visual experience of a color?
That's right.
So what's going on? So, but if you're not having a visual experience of blue, and you're not thinking blue, what's going on?
I'm gonna let you two talk about this over time. It's time